Ladies and gentlemen, we are extremely honored to welcome the chief guest of today, Mr. Rajan S. Mathews. Sir, I would request you to come on stage, please. Mr. Mathews is the Director General, Cellular Operators Association of India, India's largest communications industry association. Prior to joining COAI as DG in April 2010, Mr. Mathews served in many senior executive positions such as CEO, COO, and CFO in major companies like AT&T Wireless, Birla AT&T, Telargo, Afghan Wireless, Call Sciences, and as a senior financial executive at Beatrice International, Columbia TriStar Pictures, and PricewaterhouseCoopers. Mr. Rajan specializes in international operations, startup, ventures, turnarounds, mergers and acquisitions, and venture financing. He has managed companies in such diverse places as the US, Afghanistan, India, UK, France, Germany, Belgium, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Mr. Mathews is on the board for several profit and non-profit organizations. He earned both his Master of Business Administration and Master of Arts degrees from Rutgers University, US, and is a CPA from the state of New Jersey, US.
Yeah, thank you very much for that generous introduction. Whenever I'm introduced, I always remember the story that transpired when a person was trying to do some research on a person that they were going to introduce. And of course, you go to Google and try and find out about the person's background. And if they research this background, and the person who was going to do the introduction, doing the research, found that the close relative of the person who was going to be introduced as speaker had been convicted as a criminal and had been electrocuted in the electric chair in the US. So he was grappling with how he was going to address this matter because he wanted to be honest and he didn't want to obfuscate the matter. And so during the introduction, he says, I'm very glad to introduce to you so-and-so, so-and-so. And he did this and that. And I also want you to know that one of his very close relatives was somebody who was distinguished by the fact that he held a chair of electricity in one of our esteemed institutions. So I always get nervous because of these elaborate institutional introductions. You never know what's going to come out from one's background in these matters. So anyway, thank you, Abhijit, and members of the faculty, students. It's always a great privilege to be among you. I go back a while with Symbiosis, all the way back to 95, when I had the privilege of heading up a company called Birla AT&T, which today is Idea, and now Voda Idea, and we built out the first mobile networks in Maharashtra, Pune, Goa, and Gujarat. And we've had a long association with Symbiosis, and so it's always good to come back on this beautiful campus of yours. You're a really privileged students. And with that, let me just say that you all, as students, are living in a country that is truly on the cusp of greatness, if not already there. The type of opportunities that you have are just infinite. Growing up in this great land of ours several decades ago, we all aspired to either join the government or get into some other fixed business, and we thought that once you entered into a company, you stayed for 20 years, or 30 years, and you got to pension and retired happily, and that was it. And today, I'm astounded to find that folks stay at our companies for no more than 2 and 3 years. And there's the sense of wanting to be innovative and to be startups. Nobody wants to work for anybody anymore. So those are good things. And those are appropriate things. And so there's this new sense of empowerment. There's a new sense of ultimate horizons, extensive opportunities, plenty of funding for those who are brave enough and bold enough to want to go out and start something. So these are great times for you folks as students to be alive, studying, and getting ready to go into the commercial world. So let me bring to you some perspectives in terms of the telecom world in which I have the privilege of serving. So today I have the privilege of heading up COAI, and what do? We have members that at one point had 13 members, all of the major operating companies. Today we're down to 3. So we have Jio, we have Airtel, we have Voda Idea as our members. And in addition to that, we have all of the associate membership that plays along. So people like Google and Facebook and Ericsson and Huawei and Nokia and Sterlite and on it goes, all of those companies that play along with us. And there are 5 areas that we deal with on behalf of our membership. We deal with policy. We interface with all of the governmental agencies, be it DOT, be it the IT, be it environment, be it commerce, any and all of these folks in the government, so that we help develop the policies that are appropriate for the industry. The second area is we interface on the regulatory front in front of TRAI, who's the regulator for the industry. So we represent the industry and develop the formal approaches towards regulation. The third area is litigation. We litigate on behalf of the industry when we believe that there's been violations of terms and conditions and things of that sort. The fourth area is international standards. We're a very heavily driven by standards, and so we've helped create the new standards body for India, and so we do international standards representing the country and the associations and our membership in front of the various international associations such as ITU, IEEE, 3GPP, on and on. And then finally we do skills development. We've started up the Sector Skills Development Council for the telecom sector. So those are the 5 major areas that we look at. So when we are looking at the industry today, the quantum of change and the rate and rapidity of change is something that's going to impact us, as we've seen already. It took us about 25 years for 2G to be around. Right? Started all the way in 1994 when the government opened it up. And then all of a sudden 3G came on the horizon. And in the space of 3-4 years, 3G was history, and we're already in the 4G world. And even before our 4G networks mature and get rolled out, we're already talking about 5G. So you'll notice how quickly these transitions are happening. And so what that means for you as students, and for those of you who are getting ready to go out into the commercial world, is that if you're not ready to deal with the rapidity of change, you're going to be left behind. Be it in learning, be it in skills, be it in your outlook, be it in your motivation, and be it in your continuing ability to stay abreast of what is happening. If you don't stay abreast of the rapidly changing environment, we're going to be dinosaurs very quickly, so you've got to keep up. So this is an imperative. It's not an option anymore. All right? And so what has happened? If you look at the space of just the last several decades, you talked about the fact that, yes, when I started my career, I joined Price Waterhouse, and we were very, very proud of the fact that Price Waterhouse audited, the top 50 companies in the Dow Jones Industrial, the major companies of the world. And so we had companies like AT&T and General Motors and Kodak and all of these companies. And today, where are they? Gone. And who do you have on top of the list? Companies that were not even on the radar screen at that time. Apple, all right, the most valuable company, followed by Amazon. Never heard of those guys 30 years ago, all right? And a host of alphabet companies from A to Z that I wouldn't been able to recognize. If you had told me 30 years ago that US Steel, Bethlehem Steel, Kodak, General Motors, AT&T would all be filing for bankruptcy or be bankrupt, I would have laughed. I was an audit. I audited some of these companies. And I used to look at that balance sheet and the P&L. It says, my gosh, these companies going bankrupt, belly up? Impossible. It happened. So guys, don't get comfortable wherever you're working. The rapidity of change will ensure that if you get too comfortable, you're going to be looking for jobs in other places. Stay abreast. All right? The environment is changing far too fast for any of us to be lackadaisical or to take it easy. So where are we in the last 3 years? All right, as I told you, we rapidly changed from 2G to 3G to 4G. Geo came, and in the space of 2 years, you know what happened? A gigabit of data was costing you about $1,000. You paid 10 rupees per gigabit. All right? You used to pay about 40 paisa per minute for voice. Voice is free. All right? And you can see what it's done to the industry. We used to have 13 people or 13 companies about 3 years ago. we're down to 3 plus 1 PSU. That's how quickly things change and how rapidly they move. Because when change happens, especially in terms of the commercial enterprise situation, unless you're on your toes and unless you have smart employees like you folks, hopefully who get into these companies, companies are not going to be able to change quickly. And so that's why from 13 we're down to 3 plus 1 PSU, as I said. So what's on the horizon for us? As an industry, we're looking obviously to continue to roll out 4G. And for those of you who are on the technical end, you'll notice how the networks have changed as we've rapidly moved from 2G to 3G to 4G. The core of our network, there are obviously 3 components of our network when we actually look at it. There's what we call the radio access part of it, there's the core of our network, and then there's the transmission side of our network. All of them have changed dramatically. On the radio access side, we talk about FTD and TDD and all of these new acronyms that talk to us about changes in the radio access part of the network. And if you look at our core part of our network, it's all IP-fied. All right? And so the 600-pound gorilla that we've all had to deal with is the internet. And if you aren't connected with the internet, and if you don't know what to do on the internet and how to use the power of the internet, you're again going to be history. And so all of our networks are dominantly connected with the internet, and as a result, all kinds of things happen to our network. One of the things that happens is that we have to understand that the applications that now run on our networks now dominate in terms of the usage of what happens on our network. When we used to design networks, about even scant time period of about 15 years ago, when we used to do the access part of it, what we call the spectrum part of it, the radio frequency part of it, we used to design the networks on the assumption that the people today or then consumed 500 at most minutes of use in a month. Today, I'd like you to try and guess what that number is. What do you think the average consumption in India of minutes of use per average consumer per month is? Take a guess. You know, you study probability, you have a 50-50 chance. Take a guess. How much? 2,000. Wildly optimistic. Thank you, 650. That's right. Nowhere in the world do so many customers spend so much time gabbing on the network. 650 minutes, so you can imagine what that does in terms of resourcing and designing networks. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, average consumption of data, half a gigabit, and you paid 500-600 rupees per month. Any guesses what the average consumption of data is today? Average is about 8-9 gigabits of information. And today, we on our networks carry more data than the US and China combined. That's what you and I will be dealing with. And you can see why artificial intelligence is such a driver. Because when you have this much data going through our networks, and you're going to have to deal with trying to understand the intelligence that's embedded in this data, human beings can no longer be able to cope with the quantum and the rapidity with which this network information is flowing. Another data point. In the last 2 years, we have created more information on our networks than have been created in the last 200 years. And it's going to get even bigger. And so artificial intelligence is here to stay because of the quantum of information that is increasingly going to be generated as we begin to start moving into new technologies, especially in the 5G area. The human being is simply not going to have to be able to cope with this, and so we're going to have to say, what is it that we allow machines with a modicum of intelligence to be able to handle, and what do we be able to do this? So the first thing that we have to ask ourselves is that, how do we deal with this? Now, let me give you an example of what happened. Kaspersky was, at one time, the world champion at chess, was asked to take on Big Blue, right? IBM Big Blue, Watson. She took him on, Watson beat him. Asked for a rematch. Took on Watson again, Watson beat him. We had an up-and-coming star in India. What was his name? Yes, he beat Kaspersky. And so he was asked, all right, would you take on Watson? And so he took on Watson. What happened? Watson beat him. So the next time he decided, clever Indian that he is, and we all understand how clever we are, right? So he decided that he was going to not go up against Watson directly, but he was going to be assisted by a computer, right? So he, augmented by a computer, took on Watson and beat Watson. What does that say? Is that we can't let ourselves loose and think that AI is going to be able to solve everything. It's AI working together with human beings that are still going to have to drive the future of what we have to deal with in terms of the explosion of data. So don't worry, you're not all going to become bots sitting behind and just sort of punching keys. The issue is having to work intelligently, augmented by what we call artificial intelligence. And so there's a future for all of us. So let me talk about what's happening in our network. Clearly, 4G is there, and it's yesterday's story. We're moving away from 2G. Nobody's investing in 2G. Nobody's investing in 3G. Everybody is now investing in 4G. That's the only investments that we are making in our networks, and everybody is getting ready for 5G. So what's the big whoop, as they say, about 5G? Well, for one thing, we're very heartened to see that the government of India is now, for the first time, taken a lead in terms of technology and saying is that this country will fall behind no country in terms of making sure that we don't miss the bus in terms of new technology, especially on our networks. Data has become such a major issue that it has become a matter of sovereign concern. Every country is dealing with the fact that unless you're able to manage your data boundaries and the impact that data is going to have on your sovereign position, you're going to be left behind. And so it's appropriate that this great country of ours and our government has taken the lead in forming a high-level committee to be able to address how India is going to be positioned for being in the lead of 5G. It's good news for you, it's good news for us. Because it's going to ensure that the opportunities that come as we begin to monetize 5G opportunities in India will inure to the benefit of the citizens of this country. So, what does that mean? So first of all, we will never make money in 5G unless we get involved in standards and IP. All right? So we are encouraging folks to begin to start developing intellectual property. And that's why innovation is important. Your ideas are important. Your motivation to begin to start getting involved in starting up things that you may think are innocuous but has great potential is important. IP. And don't just generate IP. We've got to learn to monetize IP. How do we monetize IP? Making sure that we work in the area of standards, because unless your IP is embedded in standards, what we call SEP, all right, essential patents, right, you will not be able to get the benefits of your IP development. So if you're going to play forcefully and effectively in the area of 5G, you've got to develop IP and you've got to monetize the IP. Let me ask you something. The IP phone, the Apple phone, right? Ubiquitous, hazardous, aspirational, many of us use it, many of us have it. If I told you that it took about $250 US to manufacture this, how much of it do you think goes to manufacturing the phone? Percentage-wise, $250, percentage-wise, how much goes to manufacturing this phone? 50%? 20. Good guess. Good education. All right. 15%. Close. 15%. So when you say make in India, manufacture in India, great. It's not where the complete value is. How much do you think is spent on sales and marketing? Percentage-wise. 15% for manufacturing. What percentage do you think goes for sales and marketing? 20? 15 to 20? 35%. So it's about 50%, right? Where does the other 50% go? IP, that's right. Those folks who invested were smart enough, like Apple, to invest in R&D, invest in IP, monetize the IP, get it into the standards. 50% or more of every percentage that goes into the making of an Apple goes back to Apple as royalties. All right? So you can see where the value is. Which brings me to the next point. So when we begin to start looking at our networks, it is going to be an all-data network. And it's going to be an all-IP network. We are working on what we call flat architecture. What does flat architecture mean? You know, gone are the days when any single manufacturer of equipment owned the whole vertical stack. From administrative layer to the applications layer to the control layer to the hardware layer, gone. Now, you ask, what does this mean? I mean, conceptually, what does this look like? Every one of us, by the way, is probably bought a laptop or a or a desktop machine, right? A computing machine. All right? It comes loaded with software. Do you have a choice on the software that you want to load up? Yes, right? You can go to the market, you can buy a Dell, and you can buy a Vio, or you can buy any it's agnostic, right? Buy it, and you can decide what you want to load up, whether it's Microsoft or whether it's any other type of an Android OS or any other OS, or look at Adobe as a software. You can do it, right? So what have we done? We've disaggregated the hardware platform from the software platform. That's exactly what is happening in our 5G, if you want to think of it very simplistic. So those of you who are going to get ready to go into this market and are going to have to deal with telecom are going to have to realize that, yes, the future is in software. All right? It's not particularly in hardware. Hardware is going to become increasingly commoditized. They're going to have to decide how we're going to have to play. And as a result, what is happening is that because of this new approach to the network, we will be adopting what we call network slicing. All right? Network slicing will become a terminology that will become dominant in terms of the use of our 5G networks, how we configure our networks, how we use our networks. What it means is that you'll be able to segment the network to be able to provide segmented offerings. So you want high-speed, low-latency applications, like if you were doing remote surgery, we'll allow you to slice it, and we will give you real-time, dynamically, all of the way that the network is configured so that we can segregate it from end use to end use on our network, exactly what you need to ensure that there's no failure when you're doing remote surgery. Autonomous cars, all right? Same thing. We'll ensure that it's sliced so that from end to end, you can use it to deliver the type of throughput, the speeds, the low latencies, whatever it is, the customer satisfaction index that you're interested in, and we do it, and you're no longer limited by having a one-size-fits-all. That's the significant issue. So, what's this new thing about 5G? 4 things. 1, speed. Well, we always want speed, right? So we'll go from an average of 10 Mbps to 100 Mbps. You can see the quantum of change. Latency, you'll go from 10 milliseconds to 1 millisecond. All right? The next thing that you'll talk about is densification of our networks. What does that mean? That means that because of IoT and machine-to-machine and the demands that are going to be placed on our network, the points that we today call cell towers are going to multiply in terms of small little locations. So if you were going to go to the agriculturalist and say you have an acre of property, all right, and you wanted to start making sure that you effectively use it, IoT steps in and says, we can put probes in your soil. We can tell you what your pH value is. We can tell you when to neutralize or when to put in the fertilizer. We can tell you when to water this property and when to plow it. All of this can be done because there are probes. There's probably about 1,000 probes. I can't put 10,000 cell towers there. That's what we call densification. And because of this, we're developing new technologies like MIMO. Multiple in, multiple out, and I've dealt with. And we thought, by the way, that MIMO was supposed to be a 5G technology. It's already here, guys. Our networks are rolling out MIMO. Why? Because in India, we find that densification is a big issue for us. So 5G. All of the promise, all of the applications is waiting for you folks to begin to tap into and make it a success. All of you guys do technology. The future is yours in terms of being able to develop the applications because the whole network becomes disaggregated. It's flat, it's software driven, it's dynamic, it can be used for various purposes, you can slice it, and so we go forward. Now let me conclude by just 3 things. Now, I've given you all the gee whiz bang stuff, right? It's all this great stuff, it's great opportunity, it's things that you should be focusing on, things that you should pay attention to. However, in my mind, there are 3 things that you need to be very careful about. Because as we begin to start dealing with the internet, as we begin to start dealing with the applications that are there, when we begin to start dealing with the heavy loaded issue of data and applications, there are 3 things that are emerging that you and I, as good citizens, as good people who deal with this, have to deal with. There are 3 things that I kind of caution you on. One is violence as sport. Be cautious about violence as sport, and I'll unpack that. Sex as entertainment. 3, morality is optional. Let me unpack those. More and more of our young students and of our young people are getting hooked on applications that glorify violence. And we have begun to remove violence so that when you sit behind a console and you have a keyboard or a joystick, you can kill, maim, splatter blood, all without feeling what the impact of this is in our emotions and in terms of what that is in terms of reality. And increasingly, we are dealing with this whole issue of treating violence as entertainment, be it in our actual sports or in our online sports. And so we are becoming increasingly a people who are becoming frayed at the edges in terms of our approach to how violence impacts us. Our sensitivities are being neutralized to a bit. So the first thing is that be very careful in terms of how you get involved, in terms of what you do, in terms of how you treat violence as sport. Secondly, sex as entertainment. We've had a great explosion of data, I told you. We consume more data than the US and China put together. 60% of the data that flows across our networks is pornography. We as a society, we as a people who are getting ready to go in to the commercial world have got to rethink the way we treat one another in terms of our sexuality. Supreme Court made a major ruling. That's great. But why can't we sell toothpaste for the sheer fact that it whitens and keeps your teeth healthy? Why do we have to say that unless you see this attracting the other gender, that's the only reason I need to buy toothpaste? Why, when I advertise a car which is intended to take you from point A to point B, can't be sold without some attractive model being draped over the hood, as if that is the basis on which you should buy this particular car? Telecom operators are much behind this as well, I'm sure. We put all the advertising through. Sex as entertainment. You and Delhi, we're called the rape capital of the world, right? I don't know, maybe inappropriate, whatever. And what do we see? 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds being raped. Hello, what's going on? We've got to get behind this notion that we treat our sexuality as pure entertainment. And when we commoditize sex and we commoditize gender as pure entertainment, then don't be surprised that these types of things plague our country. It's in your hands to ensure that we don't go down that narrow road. And finally, let me conclude with this. Morality as optional. You're filled with a world where we can't make the determination between news and fake news, between truth and falsity. This in a country whose national motto is what? Learn it. Learn it. We're becoming increasingly unable to be able to tell the difference between fake news, right news, good news, appropriate news. And so we are dealing today with our networks as to how do we control this? Applications, WhatsApp, Facebook, Google, all dealing with this issue of how do we ensure that people can begin to start understanding what's true, what's false. And we're getting to a stage when a lot of people say, hey, listen, it doesn't matter, morality doesn't matter, right and wrong doesn't matter. If it works, it works. Be careful. It is not without intent that our founding fathers put that as the motto of our country. Satyameva Jayate. So I leave you with these thoughts. Great opportunities, great scope for your talents. Learn, understand, innovate, create IP, take the benefits of 5G, but also take care of your country. Let's understand that we can't continue to treat violence as sport. We can't treat sexuality as pure entertainment. And we cannot afford to let morality be optional. Jai Hind, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Your thoughts were extremely insightful.